Welcome, everyone. Hi, I'm Scott Cassell. I'm the CEO and founder of the Product Stewardship Institute, or PSI. And I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar, EPR for solar panels in New York. For those not familiar with PSI, we're a national nonprofit organization committed to reducing the health, safety, and environmental impacts from consumer products all across their life cycle, with a strong focus on sustainable end-of-life management. We have 47 state agency members, hundreds of local government members, and over 100 partners from companies, organizations, universities, and international governments. We work on over 25 product categories, including solar panels, as you can see here. So for those who are new to this topic, Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR, is a policy that extends a producer's financial and often managerial responsibility for the health, safety, and environmental impacts of a product, both upstream to product design and downstream to post-consumer reuse, recycling, and if necessary, to the safe disposal. Now, today, there are 124 EPR laws passed in 33 states on 15 products, including solar panels. Many of these laws are based on policy models developed by PSI with our government members like Niagara County and the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, as well as our partners, including NYSAC and Citizens Campaign for the Environment. So why are solar panels a priority waste? Well, solar panels emerged, as many of us know, as an energy source in the early 1990s. And as the technology advanced and became more affordable, more US households and businesses installed this equipment. So today, solar energy, along with other green energy technologies like wind and batteries, is a key component of climate change policy and our transition to a circular economy. But for solar panels to be truly green and circular, we must plan for the end-of-life recovery, reuse, and recycling. For several years now, solar panels have been coming out of service, causing red flags for municipal waste managers because they're costly to manage and they contain hazardous materials. But they also create new opportunities for electronics recyclers to recover rare earth elements and other materials that have tangible economic value that is critical to capture and bring back into the circular economy. That's why extended producer responsibility for solar panels, which helps spur investment in solar panel recycling infrastructure, is a strategic element in Europe's Green Deal. Building capacity for solar panel recycling should certainly be a strategic goal in the United States too. Now, many countries in Europe, as well as Washington State in the US and now Niagara County, New York, have transitioned to an EPR approach to managing spent solar panels. So the purpose of today's call is to share information that will help other New York counties to introduce and pass EPR legislation on solar panels, and to encourage New York state legislators to sponsor and pass solar panel EPR legislation at the state level. Our goal is also to encourage others on this call who are from around the country, and we have many states and local governments, to introduce and pass solar panel EPR bills in your states and local governments. So today's expert speakers each have important information to share with you. We've got a great lineup today. We're going to start off with Stephen Aquario, who's the Executive Director at New York State Association of Counties, or NYSAC, and he's going to share the importance of Niagara County's solar panel EPR ordinance and the power of local action. Dawn Tim's going to follow. She's the Director of Niagara County Department of Environment and Solid Waste, and she's going to speak about why and how the county passed this ordinance, which she was the champion of. Al Salvi, Environmental Specialist at the Washington Department of Ecology, will discuss how Washington State passed its first in the nation solar panel EPR law. Brendan Adamczyk, Policy and Program Associate for us here at PSI, will share information on the process we use to assist in crafting the Niagara County ordinance and how the program's going to work. And last, but certainly not least, David Hirschler, Senior Director of Sustainability and Legislative Compliance at ERI, will discuss how companies like ERI are ready and able to recycle solar panels once EPR laws are passed. So I'm going to be your moderator today, going from speaker to speaker. And after all the presentations, PSI's Sydney Harris is going to come on, and she's going to facilitate a robust Q&A session. But before we get started, I'm going to now turn over the mic to Sydney, who's going to share a few logistical items with you so you can all participate smoothly. Sydney?
Thanks, Scott. Hi, everyone. I'm Sydney, and I am going to give you a very brief intro to Zoom logistics in the off chance that you have been living not in a Zoom universe for the past year and a half. So just in case that's you, you should know that for today's webinar, each of you has the option of joining by telephone or your computer's audio. So to change your audio settings or select which option you want, you can click on audio settings in the lower left corner of your screen. And from there, you can also test your speaker and your mic or switch between different audio devices. Next slide, please. You can also Thank you. You can also change your view of the screen. So as you can see here, to select or exit full screen or zoom in, change other things about your view, you can click on View Options, which is normally at the top of your screen. And to ask questions, if there are technical questions, like you need help with your audio or connection or content related questions, there's a Q&A icon located at the bottom center of your screen. Sometimes you have to hover your mouse to make these things appear. Type your question in the Q&A field rather than the chat field. There's a field that reads, type your question here, and click send. And that will go to me and all the panelists. And please send questions in any time in the event as soon as you have them. And I'll be following along and compiling the questions so that we have them ready to go at the end for the Q&A. Lastly, just a note that this session is being recorded so that you can listen again or you can catch any parts that you miss. And for those who weren't able to join live today. So the recording is going to be posted to PSI's website after 24 hours. You can find it in our on-demand webinar section of our website. And as you can see on your screen, just click events at the far right of the menu and then click on-demand webinars. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Scott.
Excellent. Thank you, Sydney. And with that, I'd like to introduce Steve Aquario, Executive Director at NYSEG. Steve?
Thank you very, very much, Scott Cassell and Sydney Harris from the Product Stewardship Institute. Thank you to all the attendees for taking time from their busy schedule today. I'll just be brief. I want to thank our attendees also for joining us. It's such a great time to be working in the environment, protecting the environment, and I'm just so pleased to have so many of us from the state of New York, from local governments, and from around the United States joining us here today. Again, I'm Stephen Aquario. I'm the Executive Director of the New York Association of Counties. The association is a bipartisan organization that represents, educates, advocates for, and serves New York's counties and the thousands of elected and appointed officials who serve the public. We're very happy and pleased to bring this webinar about extended producer responsibilities for solar panels in partnership with the Product Stewardship Institute. But we couldn't do it without the great county of Niagara County, New York, and its chair, Becky Whitish. And I wanted to thank Becky Whitish for her leadership and for her stewardship of the environment in Niagara County, hopefully a leader for the other counties of the state of New York and the counties of the United States and the 3,000 counties all across this great nation. I also want to thank legislator David Gottfried for introducing this legislation in Niagara County. We wouldn't be here without you two. Thank you, and to the other legislators from Niagara County. The association has long been a strong advocate for product stewardship to shift the burden and cost of collecting and disposing of materials from local governments and taxpayers to the producers who put them in the marketplace, or in partnership with the producers who put them in the marketplace. We were a very early supporter of paint stewardship and tirelessly advocated for its passage year in and year out until the bill was ultimately signed a few years ago. And we couldn't do that without the industry in partnership with the local governments. And we're very grateful to the industry partners in that regard. We also work very closely with the state of New York to establish a statewide pharmaceutical stewardship program as part of our efforts to combat the opioid epidemic. It can work, it does work, and we can do better. Today, we're very proud to highlight how counties, in this particular case, Niagara County, is leading the way on product stewardship by bringing you this program about Niagara County's solar panel EPR law, which we believe is the first law of its kind, not only in the state of New York, but in the nation. As New York State and its new governor rapidly transitions to a green energy economy, Niagara County's law will hold manufacturers in partnership for recycling solar panels that are no longer in service. We refer to it as the next big problem. We hope our members will take this opportunity to ask questions, and all of the attendees that are on with us today of our colleagues from Western New York, Dawn Tim, and others on this panel, and we encourage all local governments and ultimately the state of New York consider passing similar legislation in the state and in our communities all across this state and nation. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Dawn.
Great. Steve, I can do a little quick introduction here, but thank you so much for being here and for the support from NYSEC. And for your information and others who are on the call, we have about 100 people here. It's an invite only. We really wanted to make this for those in New York, county, state, and those around the nation that are working with PSI on other EPR initiatives. So a great turnout today. And with that, I'm going to introduce Dawn Tim, who's the person who spearheaded this initiative for Niagara County, the first local ordinance of this type in the nation. Dawn is director at the Niagara County Department of Environment and Solid Waste. She's also chair of the New York Product Stewardship Council. I will now turn it over to you, Dawn.
Thank you so much, Scott, and thank you to PSI for hosting today, as well as the great expertise you provided in this process. And secondly, thank you to Stephen Aquario, Alex Lamont, and all those at NYSEC for sponsoring and supporting this event as well. I'm going to talk about the motivation behind Niagara County's solar panel local law and the evolution as to how we arrived at this point. As Stephen had indicated in his opening remarks, that the leadership here in Niagara County, spearheaded by Chairwoman Rebecca Whittish and our legislator David Godfrey, they had recognized that the rise in project requests in our largely rural community likely was a direct relationship to environmental concerns in the long run as it relates to not only managing these panels when the system has expired, say in 20 to 25 years, but also those that may be damaged or out of commission during a portion of their useful life. Here in Western New York, we're certainly no stranger to some odd weather, so it wouldn't be uncommon for a hailstorm or windstorm or something to cause damage to panels. And this was a portion of the reason why we were motivated by this, by EPR for solar panels. Next slide, please, Brendan. So solar is absolutely growing. We're well aware of New York State's initiative for clean energy. There has been over $1 billion pledged for solar projects. And it's not on this slide, but recently President Joe Biden has also mentioned a lot of interest and motivation for some national policy related to solar energy. But what we recognize here is that as of now in the state of New York, there is no plan for dealing with this waste source. And that, as I said earlier, is a concern for us here in Niagara County. Uncertainty about the waste source is not a strategy that we're necessarily comfortable with. And we felt that the county needed to be prepared for this bludgeoning waste source. Since as the chart that's represented here, beginning in 2008, we've got the little blip on the map up to and including halfway through 2021. Us here in Niagara County, we're looking at over 650 projects that are complete. We have over 33 megawatts DC of power allotted in our community, and more projects are currently in the pipeline. We certainly feel that that recycling is necessary for these panels. They contain metals that definitely can't be disposed of in our current solid waste management system. But again, if they can't be disposed of, where will they go? And that was our concern. And this tidal wave of material at the end of the project's lives. So if we're starting with 2008, we would be looking at 2028 for the first panels to start hitting their end of life in the waste stream. Recycling is important, not only to avoid that large quantity of waste, but because recycling these PV panels can unlock a very large feedstock of raw materials. And in describing a circular economy, one component that we are always encouraged about is job creation. And in Niagara County, that is important to us. If there's an opportunity for a dismantling and refurbishing facility here in our county that creates jobs, we consider this an absolute win. Next slide, please, Brendan. Our motivation comes from our pretty ugly past. We don't want to relive the next best thing here in Niagara County. We're home to waste associated with the Manhattan Project. Obviously, Love Canal was one of the greatest disasters, environmental disasters of our time. We have waste stored in the Lake Ontario Ordnance Work, low radiation or radioactive waste. New York State has committed to 6,000 megawatts of capacity by 2025. And that is anticipated to generate between 15 and 24 million mixed residential and commercial panels. I'll say that again, between 15 and 24 million panels to meet the 6,000 megawatt capacity goal. There is absolutely a need for New York State to take action and these proactive steps to prevent the mismanagement of this source. And not to say that they're going to sit in a barn, but maybe they will. But ultimately, we need to be responsible for these panels when talking about our community or any portion of our state or shipping them elsewhere. This is why it is important to us. Next slide's fine, thanks. The solution here was extended producer responsibility, where we would engage the manufacturers of these products, the panels themselves, into managing them at the end of their life. Both Scott and Stephen had indicated that New York State is very familiar with EPR laws. We are excited about our paint bill, but we also have e-waste, thermostats, pharmaceuticals, batteries, and looking into carpet and packaging for this next legislative session. Also today, we have colleagues on the line from Washington and talk about their local law in the state. And one of the extreme benefits of working with PSI is that they can expand the thinking and the mindset to the entire world, and have engaged Europe and the model that's been in place since 2003 into helping shape our local law. Next slide, please. So we realized that there's an incredible economic potential to a closed loop economy. Not only are we harvesting those natural resources or saving natural resources, harvesting the metals and materials for post-consumer use, creating jobs in the manufacturing and dismantling sector. This is all fostering and feeding the circular economy. This second bullet is especially important to me in my role, is that, and maybe agony is a bit of an extreme word to use here, but oftentimes with any new material, government is the last stop for disposal and management of that. It's the call of how do I get rid of? And the anticipation in years to come here, not too short, but years to come, is what happens when I have a broken solar panel on my home, or if I have an installation in farm field. How do I get rid of this? And we need to have a system in place to manage that. And we also want to avoid outsourcing this issue to other communities or other states and making it their problem. Next slide, please. So we here in Niagara County, with all of those motivations, have called in the experts, and those experts are Sydney Harris, Brendan, and Scott from PSI. They were able to develop model policies and look to current policies in place for EPR and provide technical assistance for not only solar panels, but draw on their vast experience, as Scott had indicated in his opening remarks, of the plethora of materials across the entire country that they help. Specifically for solar panels, they drew on the best practices in Europe and in Washington, what had worked and what could not work. If you've ever been involved with PSI, they have this fantastic approach to their policymaking model by looking at elements and engaging stakeholders. We started out with 17 key components, looking into the structure of the bill in accomplishing exactly what we want. Is it, how convenient can we make it? What are the requirements for the manufacturers? Is there a plan? What types of materials are collected? All of these are addressed and included in our local law. And PSI's, in my opinion, humble opinion, and their strong point is their ability to reach out and engage stakeholders. Not only do they have local governments, but there are state leaders, there are recyclers, there are members from the waste management industry and environmental groups, and not to mention the entire staff's vast knowledge about the products that we're discussing. Next slide, please. So to talk about the key components of our bill here in Niagara County, I'll just, instead of going through all 17, we'll just hit on these 5 here. We are seeking to cover residential and commercial solar panels. Any panel that is used for the generation of electricity plugged into the grid. It was important for us to distinguish between the solar panel that you have in your calculator versus one that may go on your roof or in your backyard to generate power. We wanted to establish collection and convenience. How can these panels get collected? Would there be an opportunity to drop them off? Is there an opportunity for a milk run where large installations could get collected if there was damage from a storm? How frequently is this collection? Our next, perhaps very important, most important, is the governance structure. How will the program run? Who is going to be responsible? What type of interaction occurs between the government, Niagara County, and the manufacturers, the plans that are required in place, and meeting all of the obligations that are outlined in the bill? Outreach and education. People need to know about this, and we need to be expeditious in how we relay that information, but also consistent, and engaging the manufacturer and the local government is essential at that step. And lastly, enforcement and penalties. This is critical in the sense that we're little Niagara County right here, and we're dealing with manufacturers that may not even be on our continent. We need to make sure that enforcement is strict, penalties are strict, and then enforcement occurs in order for our program to be effective. And that wraps up. I can certainly answer more detailed questions, but I did just want to end with this one point. It was important for us here in Niagara County today to not only share our experience with passing this local law, but also encourage other communities across the state that would be much like ours, that may be seeing a lot of programs come online in their community and become increasingly concerned about where this material will end up at the end of its life. And we truthfully feel that engaging manufacturers in this process helps out local government and those installers and users of the program, and will help foster a circular economy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John, and thanks for the kind words about PSI and the staff here. 15 to 24 million solar panels. Wow, that's a lot. And so that's drilled into my head right now, and it's certainly a big task for all of us. So those in the audience there, please start to send in your questions that you may have to Dawn and later the other speakers. You can type in the questions into the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, as Sydney mentioned before. And with that, we're now going to hear from Al Salvi. Al is the environmental specialist at Washington State Department of Ecology. And he's going to speak, looks like from the Cascade Mountains in Washington, about the development, passage, and rollout of Washington's first in the country solar panel EPR law. Al?
Thanks, Scott. That's actually the Olympic Mountains, by the way, but that's all right.
Sorry, West Coast error, East Coast error. Sorry.
No, you're good. All right. Hey, thanks for having me, everybody. Hope I can give you some good information to chew on here, and also, obviously, if you have questions, let me know. Send me emails, and we can try to get you some information. So with that, let's kind of just sort of jump in here to the PV module program here in Washington. First, I'll start off with our current status. Yes, the law passed in 2017. Currently, there is no program that's operational right now. I'll get into that a little bit. It was due to start originally with that 2017 legislation in this year of July of 21. I'll get into some of the history of why things have changed, but it's coming. We don't know of any, even with the passage of the law, we don't know of any companies that have come here to Washington to recycle PV modules. I've listed some of the places that we know of across the US, but if anybody out there knows of more or anything like that, please let us know. With the way the law has changed since 2017, the program is now scheduled to begin in 2025 of July of that year. One thing that has been accomplished back in 2019, the law directed us to develop a guidance document for manufacturers to use so they can develop their plans. So that has been completed. There probably will be a little more work to do there, and I may get into that a little bit later. Next slide, please. This is just a quick shot of the advisory group we had that worked with us to develop that guidance document. So we felt it was pretty good representation from the solar industry folks, as well as some of our local governments and nonprofits. Next slide. All right, so we'll get into a bit of the history here and what's in the law. Originally, it passed in 2017, and it originally passed as primarily a tax incentive bill. It was a pretty long bill. Its main intent was to reduce costs for installing PV modules and to create economic development. I mean, I think a lot of states have probably seen these kinds of things, but then someone had some forethought to, hey, we're gonna, get solar installations going here. What's going to happen when they're at their end of a life? So someone thought about getting something into that bill to look at that, and that's how we got Chapter 70A 510 created for the PV module stewardship and take back program. And basically, it makes manufacturers responsible for the financing and the take back and the recycling system. Now, the law does only cover the PV modules sold after July 1, 2017. Next slide, please. So the next iteration of the bill, we got that guidance document developed in 2019, and then in 2020, the law changed in some of these following ways. The original law, and I'll show you some of the language in the original law, but after we got an AG opinion, the original language we found out did not cover your typical kind of big solar installation type of setup. And so in 2020, the utility scale projects got added to the law. The original law also had manufacturers submit their own plan to run their recycling system. Didn't really give an option for, say, a product stewardship organization to represent manufacturers. So the updates, allowed that to happen. With all those changes, it delayed the program until 2023. The first time implementation got pushed back. And then it also established a task force to study a few things on PV modules covered by the program. Now, this got vetoed by the governor at signing. This all took place, in 2020, and it was basically vetoed because there was going to be a fiscal impact to set up this task force and do the study. And, we were just getting going with COVID at that time. And so, very worried about what the state budget might look like. So the governor was vetoing quite a few bills that had some fiscal impacts in them. So that's what happened there. However, there has been a study that has been done, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit. And then in 2021, it changed again and pushed back implementation until 2025, which is where we were at today. Just a couple side notes about the history here, and a couple things that happened when, like during the 2020 change. At that time, industry was also looking to make some changes along the lines of coming up with a financing mechanism. As it is now, the manufacturers, they need to set up and finance this program. They were trying to go back to the legislature and the sponsor to see if, hey, can we put an environmental handling charge on this or something like that. And we were thankful that the sponsor did not want to go for that, which we were happy about. And another interesting thing that was tried during this time was to only allow panels. Let me back up a sec. How can I say it? I guess the clearest way is if you owned a home that had solar panels on them, and then you sold your home, the next owner of that home, those panels would no longer be eligible for this program. And the sponsor didn't like that either, so that did not move forward. But those were a couple things to be aware of out there. Next slide. All right, so examples covered in the program. I mentioned before that the solar farms were not included. The original language said that PV modules must be installed on, connected to, or integral with buildings, or freestanding off-grid power generation systems, and then gave some examples for that. And as our AG looked at it, realized solar farms were not covered under this legislation, so got that changed. Let's see. Next slide, please. And then also we got clarification on what's not covered in the program. Your typical smaller electronic products that might have a solar component, those are not going to be part of the program, like your solar, like lighting, decorations, and those kinds of consumer products. So next slide, please. All right, Ecology's role. So back in 2019, we created this document for manufacturers to follow so they could create their stewardship plans. And we used that stakeholder group that I showed you before. So, in here, it's going to show them how to, what they need to do as far as what needs to be part of a plan, part of their annual reports, what they need to list, what their collection network might look like. And then, we would review those plans to make sure they meet requirements. And then allow them to be able to sell into Washington State. I think there is still a little bit of work to do on that guidance document, and we'll be probably circling back to that a little bit, especially in the area of creating the collection network. As we were discussing this with folks, we're used to the regular EPR programs. You got paint or mercury lights or something like that, and you have these standard requirements for what the collection network is going to look like, whether it's one per county or for every city over a certain number and things like that. And as we were working through this, we realized that kind of model wasn't looking like it was going to work really well for this industry. And so we've got some more work to do there to figure that out. And it looks like, installers will play a big part in that network so far. Okay, next slide. So enforcement. So beginning July 2025, the manufacturer selling into the state must participate in an approved plan. If they do not, Ecology would send a warning letter to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer would have 30 days to participate or submit an approved plan. If they do not, there can be a penalty of up to $10,000 for each sale of a PV module in or into the state that occurs after that initial warning. So it's a pretty substantial penalty. Next slide, please. So the manufacturer's role. They need to create their own recycling plan or join a stewardship organization. They need to finance the system at no cost to the owner. They must ensure collection and transportation. Now, Ecology, our hazardous waste regulations go a little bit beyond what the EPA has. And so we have created, when our electronics rule was done, there was an interim enforcement policy, conditional exclusion for electronic waste that was created. And that is in place for the collection and transportation of these materials. They must submit an annual report and update their plan every 5 years. And so to be exempt from the dangerous waste regulations, they just follow that interim enforcement policy. All right, so before I mentioned that there was a study that got vetoed, and somehow, I didn't know even how it happened, but the Department of Commerce came up with some money and went and did a study entitled End of Life Solar PV Modules in Washington State. So I'm going to list some of the key findings in here, and these first ones are really pretty interesting as far as the solar market here in Washington. You know, we have 264 megawatts installed. Hey, and guess what? We're a whopping 0.26% of the total installations in the United States. So pretty small up here in our little northwest corner. Hey, but we were the first to have a law passed. What do you know? Pretty cool, huh? See, it expects Washington State to install an additional 834 in the next 5 years. So seems like quite a bit. And there's a lot more solar farms that we've heard about coming in. So I think that's going to make up a lot of that. 42 manufacturers have sold into Washington State, but most of our capacity right now is on the smaller rooftop installations. Like I said, more farms seem to be coming. And a quick note on the 42 manufacturers, because you know, in 2017 there was that bill that passed that created more of a market to increase the solar installations in the state. And so when this study looked at the 2018-2019 market, just after that law passed, then the market during that time frame was dominated by just three companies. So that has, an implication when we're trying to figure out ways how to make it equal if when the manufacturers pay Ecology for Ecology's time spent on overseeing the program. And so we also need to figure out how we bill those manufacturers. And, you get 42 manufacturers. Is it prorated? You have 3 dominating the market. So there are some things to figure out there on how that payment is fair and equitable. Okay, key findings on material composition. I think this is probably not going to surprise a lot of people on this call. 70% glass, 19% aluminum, and 11% all these other types of materials. The reason that's important, though, is the Washington law requires 85% by weight of modules to be recycled. And so when you look at glass and aluminum, boom, you're there, right? I mean, so what do you do with that 11%? And that might be some of the things that are important to a lot of people. Like we were talking some people earlier about the circular economy, right? So as of now, there's not a lot in the Washington law to be looking at that other 11%. Next slide, please. So the PV modules covered by the legislation, because of, the program only takes those after July 1, 2017. So as of the modules sold to date in 2020, when they were doing that study, more than half of the panels coming in would not be covered by the program. There's a lot more coming. So as we move forward between 2020 and 2025, it's anticipated 87% would be covered. So that's another kind of something we have to work with that July 2017 date, because that is going to leave a lot of orphan materials out there. And what do you do with those? The report also recommended some next steps: economic review, necessary infrastructure development, stakeholder engagement, end of life, parties involved, enhanced data gathering. And I'll mention just a couple things on each of those real quick. The economic review, estimate cost of recycling. I understand the need to do that and the information that provides, but this law says that you need to do this. So regardless of that economic review, this still needs to be taking place here. The infrastructure development, that was really interesting during the stakeholder developing the guidance document. And a lot of our solar industry stakeholders kept telling us how there's not really very many recyclers, the infrastructure's not around, it's going to be real difficult to do. And also during that same time, we were getting quite a few calls from folks that saw the law and were thinking about getting, maybe I should come to Washington State to set something up, to position myself for this. So we did field some calls that way. And I think one of the best call that we field was a group that wanted to start acting as a PSO, a product stewardship organization, wanted to work with us on getting things nailed down so they could market their services out to the manufacturers. And so that was a great development. And the enhanced data gathering, real quickly, it's hard for us to even figure out who all these different manufacturers are that are out there and coming into Washington State. And so that's another thing that we're going to be looking at as well. So with that, I will end the presentation, pass it on to Scott, and look forward to answering any questions later on. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much, Al. Great amount of information, really interesting. And what you ended with there in terms of the jobs and economic development, we see all the time, whether it's paint, mattresses, carpet, other things, that if there is legislative activity even in a state, let alone passing the bill, there will be companies that are looking at that and making investments in those states, particularly a big one like New York, where it could be a hub for other smaller states around. So it was a great point that you made there, and we're getting a lot of great questions. So without further ado, I'm going to go to our speaker here, Brendan. Brendan Adamczyk now is the Policy and Program Associate at PSI, and he was the lead on developing this policy here in Niagara with Sydney and myself. So Brendan, you're up.
Hi, folks. Thanks all for having me, and thanks for being here. I appreciate Al and Dawn doing a great job setting up what current laws exist here in Niagara County and in Washington. And I kind of want to take a step back in this presentation and look at the national context for EPR for solar panels and what we envision this looking like moving forward. So, as I think Dawn and Al both touched on in their presentations, we're seeing an increasing interest in solar energy across the country. That's for environmental reasons, as Don talked about. Joe Biden included solar as a key target for improving clean energy, but also cost-saving reasons, that solar is cost effective. The number of installations, across the past decade, the average annual growth has increased 42% each year since 2010, and meanwhile the cost of panels has dropped almost the exact same, 43% since 2010. So really what we're seeing is, again, interest in solar going up, but the cost of solar going down. And with this, of course, as Dawn and I both talked about, we're also seeing a rise in solar waste. So panels do have a 20-year lifespan, but once they degrade, they can leach some dangerous chemicals into landfills. And so we're seeing that a lot of the initial solar installations were in the early to late 2000s, like Dawn said, about 2008, around there in New York. So, coming up on the end of the 2020s, we're going to start to see a drastic rise in solar panel waste. And if they're sent to landfills, we're missing out on this economic opportunity, to divert them from landfills and to recycle this glass and this aluminum. But due to a lack of sustainable funding, U.S. solar panel recycling right now is much more expensive than landfilling. It's about $15 to $45 per panel to recycle. versus about $1 to $5 for disposal. And so what we see the solution here, as both Don and I discussed, is solar panel stewardship. And I'll just mention here on the sustainable funding, Europe has solar panels stewardship, and we saw the cost of recycling there dropped to be about the same cost as disposal after about the past 15 years of stewardship. So what we see is that stewardship really provides a great opportunity to counteract this rise in solar waste. So as I mentioned, solar panel stewardship has been in place in Europe since 2003. Unlike in the US, what we've seen in both Washington and Niagara County and in the bills that have been proposed, solar panels in the European Union are included under e-scrap EPR laws. So they're a covered material that's collected as part of those programs. However, in those programs, we've seen these countries collect hundreds of thousands of panels, and several have reached some very high recycling rates. In France, in 2019, they hit 95%. So we're seeing, these programs, once they've been given time to develop, are really effective at collecting and, recycling solar panels. And in the US, we've seen bills introduced in a number of different states, in Arizona, in California, in North Carolina, in New York, in Oregon, and Rhode Island. As Al talked about, one state law has passed in Washington in 2017. And PSI, worked with Don and Niagara County to pass the second law in the US in this past June. But I will also, highlight, you can see here, New York is called out, and New York did have a solar panel stewardship law as recently as 2019. It didn't move through the chamber, but there has been interest here, in New York State. And obviously the, purpose of this info session is to, remind folks that there is that history and, there is that interest and, benefits here to passing solar panel stewardship on a statewide level. So Don touched on this, but I wanted to kind of circle back to how PSI developed our EPR model for solar panels. We do have this 17 element model. It breaks down, these really complex EPR laws into their key components. What kind of materials are covered, how are they being collected, how is a program being governed? Importantly, how is funding entering the system? Are producers internalizing costs and adding that to potentially the price of products, or are they charging a visible fee like in the paint care program of $1, $2, $10, whatever the product is, at the point of sale to cover the program? So we used that existing model and we researched existing legislation in Washington and in Europe. And as I mentioned, we had to sort of make a decision whether or not to move forward with the European model, which included solar panels in e-waste, or to pursue the model that we've seen in the United States, which is to keep them separate. And so we did choose to pursue that latter model, given that there are about 25 different states already with e-waste EPR laws. So using that existing legislation and with that understanding in our model, we drafted legislation. We put it together in our elements document, and then we went out to policy experts in the US and in Europe, to solar panel recyclers, and to some solar panel manufacturers as well, to understand, what do they think about the element as the law as we've laid it out? What do they think about, some of those key components, like I mentioned, that funding, governance, the stewardship plan, all of those sort of those places where manufacturers really play a key role, as well as recyclers and these experts. And we refined the model. And ultimately, we worked with Don and Legislator Godfrey and others in Niagara County to help support the passage of that ordinance. So this is really, a great example, I think, of, PSI really, trying to draw upon the expertise of our government members and of experts, who already have experience developing these kind of legislation and laws to bring this, to the United States. And ultimately, in this model, it resembles a lot of other EPR models for different products. Producers are sharing the responsibility and the burden of end-of-life management. They have to form a stewardship program similar to Call or Recycle or Paint Care in New York, where producers are working together under an umbrella organization to facilitate the program. There's sustainable funding. I mentioned that earlier, that was really key to bringing down the cost of recycling in Europe. We want to bring that to programs here in the United States, where producers are funding the collection and the recycling or safe disposal of panels. There's performance targets. Al touched on, we want these producers to be recycling at least 85% of solar panels, and given what we've seen in Europe, that's entirely feasible. The Niagara County law also sets a target of 100% collection. So we want to make sure, and even if the producers can't recycle every solar panel, we want to make sure that they're collecting every solar panel so that there are no solar panels going to landfill or ending up otherwise unsafely disposed. We also want to make sure there's standards for collection convenience. We want to make sure that there's opportunities for residents to drop off solar panels, but also for the solar panels to be picked up as they might be unwieldy or unable to be transported. We want to make sure, as outreach and education, as with all of these programs, it's really key to make sure that folks know about the program. And that includes both residents who might have solar panels, maybe, that they, disassembled and have, a barn or other storage space. But also, working with these utility scale projects, because, as I mentioned, has been discussed, solar panels do have this 20-year lifespan. But if you're a utility scale project, you might swap out your solar panels after 5 or 10 years to, maximize your efficiency. So it's really important that those folks know and understand they have this responsibility to get those panels into this program, and that the program is able to collect and, accept and then recycle or safely dispose them. And then lastly, as with all EPR programs, we have annual reporting, which is really important to ensure that the program is effective, that it's working to collect panels, that the panels are actually being recycled and safely disposed, and that we're avoiding any kind of risks, as Don touched on, of all of these other waste management, issues that have occurred when there's a lack of this transparency. And so we really want to ensure in this model that the producers and the manufacturers are being as transparent as possible with the government and with other key stakeholders. And lastly, just as kind of an overall reminder, local governments, I know it can sometimes feel like, you need to wait for the state to act, but I think this is a great example here in Niagara County of seeing that the state, had interest in solar panel stewardship, but wasn't moving forward and not wanting to wait, for the state to solve their waste management problems. Local action has spurred state action before, whether that's on, plastic bag bans, or as we've seen on EPR for both leftover pharmaceuticals as well as medical sharps. These are both places where we've seen counties pass laws that have been effective, but laws that have also spurred the state into, taking action and passing similar legislation on a statewide level. So this is something that, can be effective to drive statewide action. But, in the meantime, the benefits of EPR for solar panels, as, Don and I have spoken on, whether that's responsible management of waste, reduced costs for taxpayers, those still accrue at the local level. So if you pass a county law and it takes the state a couple of years to, get a law in place as well, you're still creating change, and you're still making sure that those panels are being, properly managed and recycled while you wait for the state to make change. So we really do want to encourage folks, on this call to think about the way that, your local government, your city or county can really, make a difference and not wait for the state to take action. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Scott.
Thanks so much, Brendan. Really appreciate that. Now we're going to hear from David Hirschler, our last speaker. David is the Senior Director of Sustainability and Legislative Compliance at ERI, and he's going to provide the recycler's perspective on solar panel recycling. And let me just say, recyclers really are the backbone of what we're talking about here. We, the policy folks, can pass these laws, but we need to have the recyclers to collect these and process them. There's an infrastructure that's needed, and David's going to tell us all about that. David?
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everybody. Go ahead to the next slide. You can go ahead. So I'll just start just very briefly with who we are. So we're the largest e-waste recycler in the country, just going on just about 20 years old. We have 8 processing facilities in the US, with our headquarters based in Fresno. And so we've processed well over 2 billion pounds. We're hoping to hit 3 billion pounds in the next couple of years of e-waste nationwide. Go ahead. So we are currently fully certified to all of the e-waste standards, which is both R2 and e-stewards. We're actually on the leadership, or have acted on the leadership councils of both those standards. We're also NAID certified, which is for data security, and then various EH&S certifications as well, so that we're making sure our processes are as responsible as possible. And in terms of what we do and what our focus is, data destruction, ITAD, which is more business side, as well as then recycling, which is more consumer grade recycling, PV recycling that we're talking about today, and then legislative compliance programs. Go ahead. And when we're talking about legislative compliance, kind of as Scott said, the recycling is part of it, but really a legislative compliance program involves managing everything. So managing the collection network, managing the recycling, and managing kind of on behalf of manufacturers or groups of manufacturers, all of their requirements and their reporting and everything, as well as some of the public education and reporting back to the Niagara County or the state agency, et cetera. Go ahead. So in terms of solar panels, we look at recycling all types of panels, and I'll get into kind of the difference between a few of the different ones. The key is making sure that you can take it apart to be able to get to the various components, bring it back. So it's got to be carefully removed from the panel, from the array or the roof, et cetera. And so we'll work with people to help with that. We'll bring it back to our facility, and then we will process it. And then we're also looking at repurpose and testing and resale as well. So we talked a little bit about legislation, but I wanted to just, in addition to Washington and Niagara County, there are a few states that are looking at different bills, looking at different options. But one other state that we haven't really talked about here is California did include solar panels as universal waste. And so that has a huge impact on the process, because as a few folks have mentioned before, the assumption is that panels are hazardous. And so when we're bringing it into our facility, depending on how each panel, whether or not it would be considered hazardous waste, we may or may not be able to process it unless we get a whole level of permits. By declaring it universal waste, the way a lot of folks have done with e-waste and the way mercury devices and fluorescent lamps, et cetera, are, where it's a product that on its own is not dangerous, but where you just have to be careful when processing it. It really simplifies the whole process. We can assume all panels are universal waste and we'll treat them all that way, but it'll also enable us to properly manage those panels. Okay, go ahead. So we had this slide, but I think a few folks have talked about it. But for us, what Scott mentioned and others is that it is a very big investment in order to begin processing panels. While we're able to use a lot of our current equipment to do it, we do have to make some changes. They're difficult to manage, partially just due to their sheer size, but secondly, due to the polymers that are keeping all the layers together. And so we look at the potential future value and how much material is out there. And so we do see the growth, but then we also see the potential of laws like Washington and Niagara counties and others that will help push more volumes to come back. So one of the things we always want to clarify is that solar panels are not one type of panel. There are two major types. The first one, which is the thin film panels, excuse me. Those ones are the ones that your utility installations are going to use. So when you see a large solar farm, that's going to be these CDTE modules. They do contain cadmium, and they're most definitely hazardous, and they're not generally what you're going to put on your residential or business. They're going to be more for the larger arrays. Then the most common, which are about 70% of the production, are the smaller, the CSI, which also do contain some hazardous materials. We've got some lead in the solder and other heavy metals, and the technology is different. And there's a few different types of the CSI modules and how the panels come together, but essentially those are the two different types. And so they have to be processed very differently. The larger panels, the large array panels, the CDTEs, are more challenging than the CSIs currently. Go ahead. So what's in a panel? So there is definitely some valuable material. You have some precious metals and some silicon that can be recovered There is aluminum and glass, as people have mentioned. But some of the heavy metals, the zinc, the cadmium, the lead, the beryllium definitely can be hazardous material. And then there's also precious metals like silver as well in the panels. So what we, just stick on that for a little bit. So what we have to do is when we're taking a panel, the first thing we're going to do is remove that junction box. That junction box is essentially e-waste. And then depending on the panel, we may also remove the aluminum frame if it can be easily removed. The rest, our process is going to be to shred the panel to then separate all the different components and try and break that polymer. Then what we do is we work directly with downstream smelters who are then able to extract the technology, extract some of the materials from there. So they'll recycle the glass, and those precious metals and phosphorus, et cetera, are going to be, can be extracted through that process. So it sounds very easy, but simply because of shredding glass is quite a challenge, and the size, and then having the right type of equipment that can really break those polymers are the challenges in this process. But it's something that as volume grows, we're able to continue to perfect and continue to improve that technology. And I think that is generally it.
Great. Thanks so much, David. Really appreciate that, getting into the recycling aspects, giving us the bird's eye view into these panels and how they're processed. So I'm now going to hand it over to Sydney Harris, who's been active behind the scenes answering tons of your questions. Great questions. And thanks to all the panelists here for staying on time. So I appreciate that. Sydney, the floor is yours here.
Thank you, Scott. And yes, I want to echo the thanks to all the speakers and everybody in the audience who has been very engaged. We have had a ton of really good questions come in. So if I could invite the panelists to turn your cameras back on, and we're just going to show our faces to folks while we answer their questions. We had a number of questions come in that that I think would be interesting to have both Al and Don answer. So one question is how it's about the issue of like panels that are already, out on the market, in fields or on people's roofs before the law is in place, right? So this issue of like grandfathering in, so to speak, of panels. So Al, how did Washington State address the issue of grandfathering in or applying the law to existing panels or not?
Well, the law states that the program, panels eligible for the program are manufactured July 1, 2017 or later. So that leaves a lot of panels out there not covered by this program. And that is an issue. It is something that we are still trying to work through to find a solution for, and we don't have one yet. I think I heard earlier that in New York, they were looking to, hey, any solar panel out there, that's what we want to collect. And I wish that's what would have happened here as well, because there was a lot of talk of how do you even track that? Do we, I guess there's some serial numbers and some things like that on panels you can go by, but that can get, I'm sure David could comment on that. That can get pretty tough. I mean, to really look at it that way. So I don't have a good answer for that one right now, because as the law states, I mean, if anything, with some of those reiterations in the law, that would have been another nice one, is just to accept all solar panels.
And similarly, thanks, Al. Don, Niagara County's ordinance took a little bit of a different approach, and I know you answered this question that someone typed in the chat, but I don't know if everyone saw it. So if you could just mention how Niagara addressed this issue.
Sure. Our intent in the policy was to cover all solar panels. We recognize that by selecting a specific date, we'd have a very large orphan share. But to think about it, we look at the plethora of panels that have gone into installation most recently, say the last 3 or 4 years. So we anticipate that we would have captured quite a bit of those. And with this law, just as young as it is in our neck of the woods, that we would have the ability to reach all corners of the market by requiring that every panel is included.
Sydney, can I just jump in and just add here? This is a typical question and a problem with all EPR laws on any product. So, you know, one way is to, in the law itself, and I don't know how we wrote it here in Niagara, but if you have let's say 10% of them are these orphan shares, are not owned by a company, or the company went out of business, and then 90% you have ownership from the brand owners. Well, the 10% is dispersed according to the market share of those producing the other 90%. So there are mechanisms here, you know, in all EPR laws to handle this moving forward. And, you know, Washington being the first, being the pioneer, you don't always get it right from the get-go there. But that's one way that it's been handled in some other different products.
Yeah, great point. Thanks, Scott. Another thing that comes up a lot in EPR across the product spectrum, but we had some questions about this here, and I think it'd be really interesting to hear from Al and Don again, are, and maybe Dave, many panels are imported from China. So how do your laws pertain to, you know, manufacturers here? How's that going to be handled? I'll leave it to Al or Don to go first. Go ahead.
I'll start. In our local law, that no panel can be offered for sale unless there is a plan, an approved plan in place. So, irregardless of the source of the company that manufactures the panel, whether it be China or Kansas, if they are engaging with a responsibility organization to represent them in the state of New York, or in this case in Niagara County, they will have the obligation to meet the plan requirements and can therefore be approved for sale or use for county if they meet our requirements.
Yeah, I mean, I can add that. So, and it kind of addresses the previous question, that generally when we're processing material for compliance, we're ideally, except for in one exception where we're required to, we're not looking at the brand of the product so that we can then build that specific brand. We're bringing the material in and allocating it to our clients based on their requirements. So it might be any CSI panel. And as Don said, if the Chinese manufacturer has a certain market share and they're in our program, we'll allocate a percentage of that weight regardless of whether or not it's their panels or not.
Yeah, I don't want to get read the definition in the law for the manufacturer, because it can get really, it's like, huh, what, you know, but because there's like a whole bunch of different things. But basically, I think we've got it covered for the most part, that, you know, even the last importer into the state, no matter how many times a panel may change hands between people, we should be able to track it back to who that manufacturer is. The problem right now for us that we've been running into is just really getting a handle on all the different manufacturers that are out there. It's a pretty big universe, and we are still working on tracking all of that down.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, everyone. So there are many more questions from the participants that I would put into the category of like, how exactly do these laws work? And we are going to try our best to get to all of those. But I also want to ask a bigger picture question first. For David, in what ways would EPR for solar panels really help to develop the recycling market? Like, how are these laws like actually going to change the recycling market from your perspective?
So, I mean, I think the big thing, and Al touched on this earlier, is that it is not currently commonly available technology to recycle this material. So what these laws do for us, and I assume for others as well, is they help us be able to make the business plan for making the investment needed to actually be able to properly handle it. You know, we can do it now, but we're not doing it as efficiently as we like. But as we are able to see that the count to Washington, Niagara, elsewhere starts expanding, we're going to be able to really put the money needed into the real technology to automate the process.
Al, did you have a hand up to respond as well?
Just I I guess, a quick comment on that. You know, I was mentioning before on how many panels in Washington State might not be eligible for to come into the program. And I don't know if David has a thought on this or not, but the obvious hope here is that, the markets develop for these things where some of these recyclers are, all of a sudden will be like, you know what? I don't care when that panel was made. Bring it to me. I want it.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think, unfortunately, recycling costs money is always kind of our answer. And so whether it be the owner, whether it be the manufacturer or somebody, has to help with that cost. So yeah, right now it's definitely not something where the commodity value of a panel is going to cover the cost. So yes, I mean, we don't rely on these laws to happen in order to look at the technology. We see the wave, we see the growth, and we know that it's the direction we're going. But these laws only help that.
And following up on that, there was a question that perhaps Brendan, you can answer, or Dave, you might be able to jump in and help as well. There was a clarifying question about whether the 85% recycling target, is that for, the full 85% of panels at their end of life, or 85% of component materials per each panel?
That is a good question. I believe that when we wrote it, we intended it as 85% of the total material collected. So that's the component of all of the solar panels by weight. It's 85% of the weight of those panels, which would then be, looking at the components. I know we discussed requiring sort of a per panel recycling rate, but I know there's as I think other folks touched on, there's some complications in that kind of last, 80 to 90% of that panel is very easily recyclable, and it's that last 10% that's tricky. So Dave, I'm not sure if you have any additions there.
I mean, no, I think you touched on it. I mean, once you're bringing in a panel to our process, obviously, if you're generating that small 10%, that's more of a challenge, then you're now no longer able to handle it as solid waste, and you have to handle it properly. So there is definitely the incentive, as well as through our certifications and our clients who are auditing our processes, to not just throw out the dangerous stuff. That's not something we would do. We would say no if we don't have a process for that. But agreed. I think the per panel, there's always going to be some residual, and so looking at per panel processing recycling rates is challenging to audit and verify.
And
I would add, just to clarify, I would add though that the Niagara County law at least does require that for whatever that last 15% of materials, they can't just put those in a landfill. Those have to be, safely disposed of, following the, hazardous waste law. So, it's not that they're not just going to get, thrown out. They are going to be, safely disposed.
Yeah, and on a little bit of a related note, but again, thinking of a little bit big picture, what about panels that aren't damaged, but maybe their output has declined or degraded a bit over time, and so they're not putting out as much, power as they were before? Someone asked in the audience, I've heard that there are efforts to collect and ship them to third world or developing countries who have communities that have no or limited access to electricity. And I've definitely heard this come up as well. There's certainly efficiency issues when you start to have panels kind of, maybe they're still usable, but they're past their prime, so to speak. So what this I think could be answered by any of the panelists. So I'll leave it to whoever wants to unmute and jump in first. But what about those?
Well, I think this is for Dave, really, but in thinking about it from Niagara County's perspective, that if the output of the panel, if a decision is made that the output of the panel is less than optimum, and the owner or if it's utility grade or the resident, whoever it is, makes a decision to take that panel, my expectation is that it's covered under the program for EPR and that it goes into David's network at ERI and they make that determination. However, there are other laws that govern that. What is going overseas? We need to make sure that we're not sending over an e-scrap, that's hazardous and not functional. So I'll stop there, Dave, and let you pick it up.
Yeah, thanks. And sorry, I'd actually meant to touch on this as I went through my slides, but we are spending a lot of our research time looking at salvage markets. There's really two parts to it. So the first thing is for us to be able to send anything out for reuse, our e-stewards, our R2 standards, and e-stewards doesn't currently touch on panels, but R2 does. We have to make sure that our products are tested and fully functional. So we want to make sure that we're developing the process for how do we know that panel actually is working in working order, so that then it can go out to salvage markets. And then in terms of the markets themselves, there are not currently many local markets, meaning US based markets. We're doing a lot of research. That's kind of our goal. Most of the salvage market for panels are in the Middle East, particularly, and then Africa a little bit as well. And so, we need to make sure as we're bringing in vendors and downstream partners who might take that material, that A, like I said, we're not shipping them waste, and B, what do they do at the end of the life of that panel? So we don't want to send them a panel that's going to last one more year, and then now it's somebody else's problem. So that's the two kind of areas that we're looking at as we research salvage markets.
Awesome, thank you. Switching gears a little bit, a question that I think Scott may be interested in answering, but everyone should feel free to jump in. The laws we're talking about here are really addressing the issue at a county or a state level. But what actions can a town take with this, if any?
Was that my cue, Sydney?
I thought you might be interested in tackling that one.
Well, you could probably do it as well, but yeah, towns, it's hard. What we're looking for really is at the state level for these bills, and if not the federal level. Things are moving there right now on packaging and batteries, even, and a number of other opportunities. The town level is very hard for something like this. I would say you'd want a wider jurisdiction for it. There's some oversight, as was mentioned before. Al mentioned, the agency, Washington Ecology, has quite a lot to do. And so, Dawn, you have quite a lot to do also in New York for one county. It's better, more efficient, more effective to be done at the state level. For a town, I'd say it's a little too small. Use your political influence and your your connections there to work at least I don't know all the jurisdictions. I know there's a county very strong through NISAC and others, a strong county system in New York. So that would be my suggestion.
And Dawn, looks like you might want to follow up on that.
I do. Thanks, Sydney. And I'm going to concur with Scott and say that, from a town level, there might be a challenge, but I do think if you recognize that as a potential issue or an issue you'd like to tackle, to certainly lobby your county. Our effort here in Niagara County was more of the grassroots, and today is really a stepping stone for us to garner more exposure across the state. We want to let other communities, counties in the state of New York know that this law is something that we've paid attention to. It is written, much of the legwork is done, and that if you're thinking about it, we need your support so we continue to build that momentum up to the state. So for a town, certainly reach out to your county and reach out to your elected officials and lobby them hard for management of solar panels at the end of their useful life. We have a local law already on the books here in New York. So it's not that you can't do anything. I just feel you might be more effective in the lobbying component.
Yeah,
Sydney, I don't know if you saw Elena's comment here on the side. Elena Bertacci from Maine, DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, says that there are some towns in Maine that are setting up ordinances that require money to be set aside for recycling up front. So, so perhaps if the towns, any towns here are interested, there is something that you can do in addition to the other things Dawn and I mentioned.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just to
The other-
follow up on that as well, just so you all know, I put this in the chat earlier, but there's been a lot of interest, obviously, in seeing the actual language of the ordinance that Niagara County passed. And so we will be following up with an email with that to all the registrants after this event. And Al, it sounded like you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, just the other thing, with everything else that, in addition to what Scott and Don mentioned, when we were having our stakeholder group here in Washington State, we would have loved you to be part of our stakeholder group. It's not easy to get, whether it's a local government, cities, what have you, to come participate in that. That's another way. If something's happening in your state, in your county or something like that, hey, reach out to them and be part of the process if you've got the time to do that. I know your resources are stretched thin, but we would definitely welcome your participation.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Thanks, Al. While you're unmuted, or I guess you remuted, but Al, a couple more questions for you. Back to some of the nitty gritty of how Washington's and Niagara's laws work. Did Washington amend its insurance laws to require that homeowners insurance brokers include, solar panel damage to their policies? Or has this been an issue, or is there some sort of separate law that you think might be needed for that?
It's a great question, and I don't have an answer for it because it's something that has not come up.
All right. Another one is kind of a two-parter, but what language was used so that utility scale solar projects, which we all know can change ownership, right, over the course of their lifetime, are covered for the lifetime of that project? And Dawn, you may want to answer this as well, obviously, for Niagara.
Yes, thanks. And this was important because utility scale projects are prominent and prevalent in our community due to the amount of flat rural space. But I want to just take a step back and talk about the importance that we had to distinguish between decommissioning bonds and this local law for EPR. So decommissioning bonds, if I sold, if I installed a system on Sydney's farm, and at the conclusion of 25 years, I could decommission that project if she desired, or I could leave it there. Let's say it's decommissioned, my bond is posted, they remove everything. Well, where do they go? And that's what EPR addresses. Now, what became a concern for us here in Niagara County is that if Sydney elected to say, no, thanks, I'm going to take over the system, it's completely paid for, I'm going to let it generate more electricity on my farm and reap the benefits. Well, what happens then to the materials? And again, EPR comes in and saves that day by making the manufacturers responsible for those panels when they are removed from service. So I hope that, kind of circles back and answers much of our motivation behind that.
Yeah, thank you. That's awesome. Al, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I will chime in that
yeah.
I have heard quite a few stories, and so far nothing, major, but quite a few stories of people telling me, can you take my panels? I've decommissioned a job and now I've got a warehouse full of them because I don't know what to do with it. So it does remind me of, some of the CRT stories and things like that of 5-10 years ago or even less, where, there is some stockpiling of that. So the decommissioning happens and then the panels kind of sit and they're waiting for more cost-effective solutions.
I just want to say one thing about that, and what becomes a general concern, is waste storage. That solar panels right now are not declared universal waste, although there is discussions about that occurring in the state. But they would be subject to storage requirements. And of course, space costs money, and then, the danger of storing materials, et cetera. So that's something, to become cognizant too, that we're looking to avoid this, avoid stockpiles. I mean, CRTs were dangerous enough, and now, we're moving those through. And the concern becomes when these, 15 to 24 million panels, over the next 20, 30 years are decommissioned, there needs to be, an avenue.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add, very similar to what Dawn said, we've had very few utility scale projects happening in Washington, but I have been getting some calls on people that are looking into that or are down the road on some of these projects, and asking if they are, subject to the Washington law, in which case now they are subject to the Washington law. So what we're hearing is now in the contracts that are being drawn up that they are taking that into account and trying to get that in the contract ahead of time in order to meet the requirements of the law.
Fabulous. I am going to have to pause us here because I'm looking at the time and we are set to end at 1:30 Eastern. So I'm going to turn it back over to Scott and Brendan, as I think there may be some wrap up things to cover.
Thanks so much, Sydney, for an awesome job fielding all of those questions as usual. I also want to thank the audience for all their questions that you have put in. If there's any other questions that we have not gotten to, we'll send some answers following this presentation. I also and most want to thank our speakers, Stephen Aquario, Dawn Tim, Brendan Adamczyk, Al Salvi, and David Hirschler. Great job, everyone. This is the first such event that we have done for this. We did one on solar panels a while ago, and Washington passed their law, but this one is more focused and a lot more information that we were able to present. So thanks very much for all of you. And last but not least here, a huge thanks to Dawn for being a great partner with us and bringing PSI in so we can assist in this, but your leadership and Legislator Godfrey's leadership also passing this bill ordinance in Niagara really opened up a lot of possibilities as we're seeing here. So thanks very much, and we look forward to working with you and others across the state. So if any of you out there would like information about solar panel EPR in your community, your state, you can contact any of us here on the PSI team for more information, and we can assist. We're a 501c3, but we do a lot of consulting for public and private clients. Once again, this information session was recorded. The recording will be available on-demand webinars section of PSI's website within 24 hours. And to access this session and other webinars you may have missed, and we do quite a lot of these, you can visit productstewardship.us. You can click on events and then on-demand webinars as you see with the arrow on the screen. So as soon as the event ends, you're going to see a survey that pops up. And we'd greatly appreciate if you could just take a couple of minutes. Let us know what you thought of this webinar. Was it helpful? What other ones would you like to see? Would you like to see more along this lines or any of the other 25 product categories we're working on? And as Dawn knows, there's many EPR topics that New York Product Stewardship Council and others are interested in moving ahead, particularly on packaging, batteries, mattresses, carpet, and some others. But this is a very big one right now for all of us, but let us know what you're thinking. So that's it for today. Thanks very much, everyone, and have a great day. Take care.